Here's what you're missing over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios,
you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we have with us John Michael Priest, author of many books, but one of his Gettysburg books is Stand to It and Give Them Hell, Gettysburg as the Soldiers Experienced It from Cemetery Ridge to Little Round Top, July 2nd, 1863. And John, welcome to Addressing Gettysburg.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So this book, now just so the audience knows, typically, as you know, we'll do a book interview based on a chapter in the book. But there was a little bit of a mix-up on our part here, and we didn't let John know that we needed a copy of the book, and that's my fault. That's nobody else's. I should have been a little bit more communicative with Dave. But regardless, we're going to wing something anyway. We're going to talk more about the process, because this is a unique book. I hear a lot of good things about it, and somebody was telling me last week that it's interesting because you're using mostly soldier accounts. You're not retelling the story of the Battle of Gettysburg. I mean, you are in the sense where it gives the reader context for what quotes they're going to read. But for the most part, you are you're letting them tell the story. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I don't deal much with generals unless they get in the way.
Okay.
Or they actually do something that someone remembers.
So, in other words, if a private writes about a general walking by and saying or doing something.
Right. Yeah. Like there's an account in there about a fellow named Bullard with, I think, a New Jersey regiment who was with Sickles when Sickles got hit. Okay. Or Longstreet's orderly, a fellow named Youngblood, who wrote about items on the field and mentioned Longstreet, for instance, walking across the field in Kershaw's attack. Mm-hmm. So then, yes.
Okay, but you're not really caring too much about their perspective.
Well, not really, because they've got a totally different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The official records had to be approved from the top down.
Right.
So sometimes the timing that the men write about isn't right, or that the generals write about isn't, and they can broad brush a lot of things. Like at the Battle of White Oak Swamp, the 20th New York, a German regiment, United Turners, hit with one artillery shell, ran. And General Baldy Smith wrote, "They behaved as well as could be expected under the circumstances." So the men and the officers, particularly enlisted men, have very little to lose by telling the truth.
Sure.
And even though they're writing, some of them, most of the literature, years later, it's because the memories, they either forgot what happened and don't write about it, or won't talk about it, or they're writing about it because they can't forget it.
They're haunted by it.
Yes.
Also, they can't write about too much either. And if they do, you know that they're either repeating something they heard from someone else, or embellishing, or just completely full of shit. For example, like, I'm a private. I'm one man in a line of thousands of men, right? There's smoke all over the battlefield. There's bushes, trees, buildings, fences, hills obscuring my view of everything, distance. And so it's I'm not going to be able to tell you if I'm fighting down by, on Devil's Den. I'm not going to be able to tell you what's going on the Emmitsburg Road north of the Peach Orchard.
Right.
Because I can't see it. And frankly, I don't care to see it because I'm worried about what's in front of me right now.
Exactly.
So it's a very, what's the word? Is it myopic view of things?
Yeah, it's kind of narrow.
Narrow, yeah.
What they pay attention to are the bushes, the rocks, the fences. What they can't see, they pay attention to the fellow next to them. Mm-hmm. He might get hit and they might not even know it, or they'll hear something and they can tell by the snap what type of bone it is that got broken. It's a very intimate thing with them. They remember generals. Usually if they're close enough to them. But, they have to be narrowly focused. And that's true with any soldier.
Sure.
If like during Nam, if you're in a foxhole spread out, or World War II, you only know what's going on in front of you.
Right. You can't be wasting your time looking around and seeing what's going on elsewhere either. You have to worry about what's in front of you.
Right. And so that's what they remember. It's not that the officers are wrong. It's the different experience. But again, you can only make private so many times. So what are you going to lose by telling the truth? Mm-hmm. And if you lie, someone's going to pick it up.
Yeah.
They wrote for a military audience, their comrades, and they assume that the reader knows what they're talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
So a person has to know their tactics. They have to know what the commands meant. They have to realize that someone might be able to charge, but only 6 guys heard it. So when the guys take off, the men follow them because, they're going somewhere.
Right.
I mean, really, that's how it happens. Or you got horses that knew the bugle calls better than the men, particularly in the artillery and cavalry, and they'd respond to it, even though if it wasn't theirs. I mean, you get these little things going on. So they remember, for the most part, what specifically went on around them. And the trick is finding where these pieces fit into the narrative, into the puzzle. Maybe not 100% right, but the idea, you have to understand what they went through because they shaped the country after the war.
Yeah.
The same way the World War II veterans shaped those for us baby boomers. The same way the vets of Nam, still fighting the wars, many of them, shaped it when they raised. It always has a ripple effect.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But when you talk about it, talk about the way they did things and explain it on the ground level, veterans of other combats can relate to it. And they can understand, you mean they weren't standing up? No. So that's how I do that. We
were talking before we started recording, and you were talking about how any chance they'd find something to hide behind,
right?
If they could. And we tend to not think of Civil War soldiers that way. And maybe in the beginning of the war, and for most of the war, perhaps they were in line and everything like that. But there are certainly situations where they had the liberty to not hold formation and could get behind a rock or a tree or whatever they could, of course.
Well, yeah, and an example, for instance, at Antietam, the reason there were so many casualties is there was a heavy ground fog, high humidity, smoke hung on the ground. They walked into each other at close range.
Couldn't see. And that's an important thing, and I try to stress this whenever it comes up on the show. There's a book I read called The Environmental History of the Civil War. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't.
It came out a few years ago. And it's very good because it makes it first of all, it strips the romance away from warfare and army life and all that stuff. It's mostly about feces and disease and other things, just how the body breaks down when it's starving, things like that. But how the environment shaped the way the soldiers lived, the decisions the generals made, and then also how our armies, learned to manipulate the environment to their benefit, with removing hills or whatever the hell it may be.
All through history, okay. Revolutionary War, the British stopped using linear tactics in wooded areas.
We did, or the British?
The British.
The British did?
Yeah,
okay.
But you don't hear that, because they're Brits that got to go in formation.
Right.
In Revolutionary War, when von Steuben came over, he said Americans make excellent soldiers, but you got to explain to them why they're doing what they're doing.
Right. We want to know why.
So Americans are very different in the sense that they often will think on their feet.
Yeah.
At Antietam, at the sunken road, the bloody lane, William French's division did not send out skirmishers. Why? No one knows, and you're never going to find out probably. But the first two lines, actually being Green Regiment, went in, climbed over a fence, and walked into fire. The third line coming up had three veteran regiments in it, meaning they've been in one or two fights maybe. Mm-hmm. They hit the ground and laid down behind the fence.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because it was stupid to stand up.
Yes. And being veteran, they knew better.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's how they learned. The thing is, we tend to romanticize this conflict way too much.
I agree.
There's no romance in it.
No.
You know, it's like one guy said, "You mean you tell this guy that his grandfather ran during Pickett's charge?" Yes.
Yeah, that's something I don't understand is first of all, grandfather maybe, but probably great-great-grandfather. You never met him. I guarantee you never met your great-great-grandfather. You might have heard stories about him, and there's that like family pride and all that stuff, which is nice. But that doesn't mean because you don't want to hear that your great grandfather might have wanted to live. I see. I don't think if you step off. Let's say we're talking about Pickett's charge, mm-hmm. and you step off and you get 2, 3, maybe 500 yards out. And then you see that, no, this is too hot, and I've been around long enough to know where this is going to go. I'm going to go back.
Right.
I don't think that's cowardly.
No.
I think it's cowardly to not step off. I think it's cowardly to be about to step off, and everybody steps off, and you go the other way at a run. But if you at least made the effort, you're not a coward.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that veterans wouldn't necessarily call them coward if they couldn't go in.
Okay. Because they all probably at one point or another.
There's at least one account from Antietam at Burnside Bridge where the Union soldier froze.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't move.
Mm-hmm.
His friends picked him up and laid him alongside the bridge. I mean, really, they weren't upset over it.
Right. Because they understand.
There were men, who, for instance, at Gettysburg, the sergeant major of the 2nd Wisconsin, I think it was, went and told another fellow, I'm going to get killed. And the sergeant, his friend said, well, you don't have to go in. Sergeant majors don't matter that much.
Right.
But he did.
Yeah.
And he got killed. So they were a little bit more understanding about it. The romanticism that comes in after the war was basically to soften the after effects on the civilians that didn't go in.
Okay.
But, Pickett, there's a great thing with Pickett talking with Lee after the fight, that one in the movie with, General Lee, I have no division. Well, Longstreet's orderly, Youngblood, saw that. And, apparently, Pickett rode along the front of Spangler's Woods below the crest, found Longstreet in the hollow, and repeated the same thing. And Longstreet turned to him and said, don't worry, George. You'll find most of your men in a half hour or so. Uh-huh. So what happened, right?
Yeah.
We're too easy to call it cowardice because we're not the ones that know what they're facing. We're not the ones that are going to get shot.
Right. It's easy from this distance to think someone a coward for doing something that most of us couldn't do once. And this is the how manyth time these guys have been asked to go and do these things.
And it wasn't uncommon for soldiers like at Cold Harbor, a regiment of the 6th Corps veteran threw itself on the ground and let the new guys go over the top of them because they weren't going in.
Yeah.
And again, we misused the word hero.
I agree.
Heroes happen by accident.
Yep. They don't get a salary.
Yeah, you lead a charge and there's no one behind you, but it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah.
Listen to the rest of this interview and dozens like it, support the show, and get early access to special episodes, early and discounted ticket sales, and more. The second lieutenant level and above gets access to all monthly Patreon episodes. So please go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg, choose a tier, and join. And I thank you in advance.